Okay. Okay, all right, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, hello. A very long coffee break, which I'm sure is very enjoyable. Not because we had the most optimistic discussion in the previous panel, how to reform international governance. However, I am also aware of the fact that this is an opportunity to say hello to all the new friends, which explains why our coffee breaks are taking much longer than what we budgeted for. But anyhow, it's great to see all of you back here. Okay, I'm trying to get everybody's attention. Okay, so officially welcome back from the coffee break. This is the announcement for our third and last panel of the conference. With NATO and the EU expanding their reach and influence, especially through ongoing enlargement efforts, key questions arise about regional geopolitical dynamics. Can these strategic moves reinforce Europe's security and stability, or potentially aggravate tensions with global powers? Now, this is a question that we will discuss in the upcoming panel. Our panelists will have to navigate a complex, dynamic, difficult landscape, and I have no doubt they will do a terrific job that will probably push us to extend the time for this panel too. And then, sadly, we're going to say goodbye. But for now, I'm going to first invite the speakers. Please join me in welcoming the moderator of the session first, Professor Füsun Türkmen, Vice Chairperson of GRF, Emeritus Professor of International Relations. Welcome. I will very quickly announce the rest of the panelists for the panel. Ambassador Tacan İldem, former NATO Assistant Secretary General with us. Tacan Bey, great pleasure to see you. Her Excellency Ana Palacio, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain. Welcome. And Dr. Jamie Shea, former Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
All yours.
Yes, how does it feel to be at the last panel? I hope we are all geared up. This is perhaps the sexiest subject, who knows? So security, yes, our last panel is designed around enlargement and security. NATO and European Union enlargement, will it provide security? This is the main question our speakers will try to answer. It evidently brings along other interrogations as well, like is enlargement an enhancer or a hindrance to security? Still, without a properly designed foreign and security policy, can the EU effectively provide it without NATO? And that regardless of enlargement, which still remains theoretical given the war and expansionism looming around the potential candidates, i.e. Ukraine, Moldavia, and Georgia. And last but not least, what are the prospects for European security in the light of the upcoming US elections? As far as NATO's fate and European security are concerned, given former President/candidate Trump's well-known views on the subject, probably former Secretary General Stoltenberg is happy to have moved on rather than facing the election night on November 5th, especially since there is a toss-up between the two candidates, between Harris, who is deeply committed to NATO and European security, following the steps of Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, deeply skeptical about it. So I do not have to introduce our speakers. This is an absolutely stellar cast to tackle this subject. We have, as you know, Madam Minister Ana Palacio, Ambassador Tacan İldem, and Jamie Shea, we all know so well from NATO. I don't have time to enumerate their titles, so please let us start, since we are already running a bit late on schedule. And the floor is yours, Mr. Shea.
Dear Madam Chair, thank you very much for that very noble and entirely appropriate introduction of our qualities. First of all, let me, like everybody else, thank the Global Relations Forum for having had the courage to invite me to this conference. I'm also delighted to be on a panel where at this time of day there are more people in the audience than on the panel. I have actually been quite often in the reverse situation, but I'm not taking any personal credit. Let me be clear about that, for the fact you are still here. Churchill said of Attlee that he was a modest man with much to be modest about, and I have to say that applies to me as well. To lead off, and I'll speak about enlargement more than about Trump, but no doubt he will re-emerge, as he always does, when we have our discussion later on. I mean, NATO this year has been celebrating its 75th anniversary, and it's somewhat of a paradoxical occasion because, you know, on the one hand, after 75 years, you could argue that never before have we needed so much, NATO so much, never before has it been so relevant to our security, but on the other hand, never before has it had to live with so much complexity in the strategic environment, uncertainty, even real dangers today. And I suppose, you know, if you ask an old NATO ambassador, of which there are many here today, including my old colleague as well, Tacan, who was Turkish perm rep at NATO, would you have preferred to be sort of back in the 1990s with a sort of a weaker NATO but a more benign environment, or to be there today with a strong NATO, but of course we're in such a difficult environment? What would they honestly answer? Now, this paradox also applies, of course, to NATO enlargement. On the one hand, you know, the return of, unfortunately, confrontation with Russia has made it easier. Finland and Sweden have, you know, revised their old attachments and non-alignment, have crossed the Rubicon very quickly, absolutely, and with an amazing surge of political, media, popular consensus almost overnight, and have integrated into NATO. And in the case of Sweden, your country has helped a little bit, of course. Would I say to smooth the process? But you did it. So thank you to the Turkish Grand Assembly for that. But on the other hand, Madam Chair, the more confrontational environment has made it more difficult to enlarge NATO, particularly to those countries, and we're going to talk a lot about Ukraine today, that are not part of the EU simultaneously, that are not part of the classical West, and where the degree of interoperability, sort of interconnectivity over time has not been as it has been for Sweden and Finland as NATO's super partners. So this means that inevitably the NATO enlargement process going forward has been put on hold. Now, it's not, I believe, whatever the sort of media atmospherics, because of Russian vetoes or Russian opposition. NATO has had those since the beginning of the enlargement process and has never given Russia that type of droit de regard or veto over the process. I also don't believe that it's because NATO is backing away from the open door, which it proclaimed at the beginning. If you were in Washington at the NATO Anniversary Summit in July, the talk was of Ukraine being on an irreversible path to NATO membership. I also don't believe that it's because of the sort of things that I had to deal with in my days at NATO, you know, sense that, oh, if NATO gets too big, it's going to become dysfunctional. No evidence that 32 doubled the membership at the end of the Cold War, it's become less capable of taking tough decisions. Or because, you know, the new members are going to be absorbers, consumers of security, they're not going to be providers. No. If you look at the situation today, the new members are spending, on average, more than 2% of GDP than the old members. Poland is even going towards 5% of GDP, and the Baltic states are towards 3%. And I think they've shown that when it comes to the helping to prop up NATO's collective defence, they're all doing their part very well. So if there is a problem, I think it's obviously because of geopolitics. Previous enlargements of NATO took place at a time of improving security, where you could make an argument that the improving security context facilitated NATO enlargement. You know, the coast is clear, let's do it. And on the other hand, the enlargement process in turn reinforced that sense of greater security and progress. Now, of course, we're in a more difficult environment. NATO has never had to extend security guarantees to a country involved in a very hot war, in a degenerating security environment, without knowing whether this time round the enlargement process would also add to that degenerating security environment. At least the debate is there and has to be tackled. The other thing is that enlargement worked because NATO was able to extend security guarantees in peacetime, which means that it could define the rules of the game. By enlarging to a country in peacetime, you could decide how you're going to fight on your terms against any given hypothetical adversary. If you do it today, it's on Russia's terms that you would have to engage. And unlike in the past, where NATO gradually extended the security guarantee in reality over several years, you know, through stationing of forces, through standing defence plans, and all of the exercises and all of these kind of arrangements, if NATO enlarged today to a country at war, it would have to figure out overnight how it was going to establish a concept of deterrence and a war-fighting capability. So this is complicated stuff. So what I'm going to say, and the basis of my remarks, is that the old sort of paradigm of NATO, which was, it was just about the relationship between NATO and the individual member state, where we basically said, we'll be ready when you're ready. Now it's different. It's much more a question of what is NATO's future concept for providing security, and does a given candidate country tick the boxes when it comes to being able to meet the requirements for the kind of security organisation that now NATO needs to be? So what are those, very briefly, because obviously our time is limited, particularly mine. The first thing is that, you know, I was invited this year by your successor as Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy to do a series of podcasts on NATO's history. I was known as the dinosaur in residence at NATO, so I'm the only one who sort of remembers the Cold War and could do this kind of thing. And I went through various phases. You know, we had the Cold War phase, we had the projection of stability, partnership for peace phase, we had the interventions in the Balkans and beyond phase, we had the hybrid warfare phase, and now back to collective defence. And I think the first big issue of NATO is all of the phases of its history have been rolled into the present. We still have partnerships, we still have interventions, although other people these days are doing the interventions, not NATO, but we still have to calculate how they're going to affect the environment around us, including Israel, of course, at the moment in Gaza and Lebanon. We still very much have the hybrid war, of course. We still very much have, of course, the need of deterrence and collective defence. So we're now dealing with a full spectrum set of challenges which require a full spectrum of response. We are playing out NATO's history, not in stages or phases, but all mangled up together at the same time. The second thing is that we have to restore deterrence at the moment. Now, from my historical perspective, deterrence worked because the countries that did it were basically conservative and status quo. They weren't directly challenging each other's territory or domain. They were risk adverse. They had clear doctrines which were common and understood by each other. They had good crisis communications, and they had, and we spoke about this earlier, a series of arms control arrangements which act as shock absorbers and buffers. And finally, they modernized their nuclear weapons very infrequently and only modestly in terms of a technological arms race. None of those things apply today, where we have an increasing number of countries, Russia the latest, last month, changing their nuclear doctrines to make nuclear weapons more usable in a greater number of scenarios. So number one, how does NATO re-establish deterrence in conditions which are not suited for classical deterrence? The third thing is civil protection. We are now in Poland building air raid shelters, coming up with evacuation plans for mass evacuation, for mass medical facilities. Ukraine has shown the need in wartime to protect millions of your civil population who can be directly targeted. But at the same time, whereas in the Cold War, our concept of civil defence was passive civilians, we are going to protect you. What's different today is active civilians, as Ukraine has shown, and many other countries, that civilians, whether it become, teams that deal with cyber security from the private sector, private citizens who go online to help you to detect the disinformation campaigns, people who volunteer to be air raid wardens or to help with evacuation or emergency doctors, we're going to the concept of active civilians in our civil preparations. The fourth challenge is mass versus quantity, or quality. We are going back to this very difficult debate that we had before as to how much do we need to have mass-produced military equipment, massive stockpiles for the needs of modern warfare. Russia has been firing 10,000 shells a week in Ukraine. Quantities have been exhausted very fast. Our stocks have been inadequate, whilst at the same time taking account of the revolution in military affairs through information and high technology. This is causing big challenges for NATO in terms of procurement. It's more difficult for governments to mobilise current industry for war production than it was in the days of General Motors or Ford during World War II. More complex supply chains, which means that it's harder for industry to get the resources to produce weapons. More volatile budget cycles, which means we allow old legacy programs to go forward to what we don't need, but can't fund new programs. And of course, behind all of this, the need to incentivize industry to be willing to make the investments with profits likely to be only in the distant future. And then we're also dealing with what I call deep front operations. What is striking about Ukraine, but also about the war in Gaza to some degree, from a strictly military perspective, is that countries are striking each other thousands of miles. I mean, the Israelis fly their planes all the way to Hodeidah in the Red Sea, in Yemen, to carry out strikes. The theatre is expanding all the time. Ukraine sends drones 2,500 kilometers to Tomsk in Siberia to strike Russian targets. The Russians send missiles onto the Danube, the border with Romania, for example, to try to interdict grain shipments on the Black Sea. What does this mean for this ability, whereas we've been in a kind of operate on the immediate frontier of confrontation, what does it mean now to have these vast expanding theatres of potential warfare that you need to cover? We also have, of course, the Asia-Pacific theatre. I could speak about that, as NATO increasingly recognises a similarity of interests and concerns with the Asia-Pacific countries. Latest news is North Korea apparently is now putting soldiers into Ukraine. North Korean commanders have been killed this past weekend in the Donbass region. Iran supplies Russia with drones and missiles, but then Iran asked Russia to provide it with air defense to deal with a hypothetical, but looking probable, Israeli strike on Iran. I could talk about this at great length. In my country, the UK, we call this the churn. It's the biggest problem that every security organisation has on its plate today, which is the number of things that are classified as a national security threat is growing all the time. Pandemic, cyber, AI, critical infrastructure, ports, undersea cables. And most of us don't know at any one time what should be the priority, what should get the resources, and when we need to switch resources from cyber to something else because of quantum computing or bioengineering, because it's now adopted a higher degree of urgency. As we move to a knowledge economy. And the problem with the knowledge economy is that you can't count knowledge in the way that you could count tanks and aircraft and missiles and know pretty much how capable your adversary was. And we have the private sector as well, which is playing an increasingly important role. It's not governments today, Madam Chair, but it's Meta, Instagram, obviously YouTube, WhatsApp. It's Meta, which determines what 3 billion people around the world recognize as truth. It's Elon Musk, who basically now manages the United States space program, as well, of course, as supplying the Starlink system for Ukraine. And I can tell you that American CEOs that trade in China meet much more frequently with President Xi and have better relations with him than the United States State Department as well. So how does this affect NATO? So what I want to say as I come to an end, looking at the future of enlargement, is that it's basically about where a country applying to join NATO could add or subtract from, can you improve our deterrence? Can you improve our capacity to deal with hybrid warfare? Can you help us with civil protection? Can you help us with mass versus quality? Are you able to mobilize a private sector and an innovation knowledge economy to help us? Are you able to integrate the economic aspects of security, supplying us with gas? Ukraine has actually done this with the military aspects of security. Can you help us to build partnerships, including outside Europe? And one day, when finally, hopefully our confrontation with Russia or China would end, are you going to hold us back in an old NATO, a Cold War NATO, not adapted to modern circumstances, or would you be willing to move intellectually at that very moment to a different paradigm of security in the way that we had to when the Berlin Wall came down after 1989? So, my concluding thoughts about the future of NATO enlargement. It's no longer NATO's only or primary stability policy. Partnerships with like-minded countries like New Zealand, Australia, Japan are more pragmatic, more fast-moving, and are equally, if not more useful, in dealing with the challenges of the current environment. Certainly you can go faster. There's less ideological baggage. The second thing is that the link to NATO's defensive tasks are more important. Finland and Sweden were very good add-ons to NATO, not just because of the democratic values, but because they brought real capacity into NATO in terms of their conventional forces, their reserves, their navies, their air forces, and were able to help NATO with the Baltics. I think the third conclusion is it makes, given the role of the EU now in defence, I know in Turkey this is a topic, but still, Brussels, we observe a lot of activity in the EU on defence. It's increasingly important that there be overlap between EU membership and NATO membership, if possible, going forward. Every new member state has to have a greater capacity for self-defence. It's what you bring to NATO. Somebody quoted Kennedy this morning, I would do too, rather than what NATO can bring to you. We must be consequential. We must be consequential. In other words, if NATO judges that it will offer membership to a country in the future, its military alignment has to go alongside its political alignment. That has not been the case in Ukraine. Jens Stoltenberg, our old boss, has made this point very well, and I agree. I've been saying it myself, that the logical thing to do if Ukraine was going to be a member of NATO one day would have been to start supplying it with weapons and training and to build up its forces in 2014 after Putin invaded Crimea. Not only after 2022, when the country was in a far worse position. It would have perhaps prevented the war, or at least have made it less catastrophic. And we have to use enlargement intelligently to provide political solutions. For example, we have a situation now with negotiations about territory in Ukraine. When, how, we don't know. But the whole question is, would you say to Ukraine, NATO enlargement has to be as part of your willingness to come to some kind of an agreement with Russia on territory first? Obviously, you can't have enlargement without clear territorial dividing lines. And then finally, final point, it can't go ahead unless NATO, and here I come back to our old profession, Tacan, I was NATO spokesman, so I bear the responsibility here too, without a much better effort to deconstruct the Russian narrative on this. Every time I'm on Al Jazeera or China Global TV or any kind of network, all I get, but it's also countries in Europe like Italy and many others, is, well, you're to blame, it's NATO enlargement, if you hadn't started this, everything was fine before NATO went ahead. In other words, Russia has responded to NATO enlargement, rather than, of course, the NATO enlargement being the response to Russian aggression, which is, I would argue. But whether you like it or not, this Russian disinformation has got a very, very powerful hold. And I think NATO has to do a better job politically in deconstructing this narrative in order to be able to move ahead. Sorry, I was probably far too long, but that is the consequence of keeping me patient all day long before our panel at the very end. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this challenging introduction. Apparently, we have a lot to tackle, and without further ado, please, Ambassador, the floor
Thank
is
you.
yours.
It is a great pleasure for me to be here today before such a distinguished audience and with Minister Palacio and my good old friend and NATO colleague Jamie Shea, under your leadership, Professor Türkmen.
Just moderation.
Jamie was so eloquent in having a tour d'horizon of what NATO stands for at this time with this complex security environment. And certainly we need to deal with the issue of enlargement, and since we will be talking about security from that perspective. And I think immediately after the Cold War came to an end, both NATO and the European Union had designed how enlargement could happen, even by defining the modalities of such an integration. I remember 1995 study of NATO for enlargement, enumerating some of the obligations on the part of the aspiring states to fulfill in order to join NATO. And throughout the widening, enlargement and deepening process of the European Union, and I'm proud to say that I'm not an EU expert. We have several of my colleagues who are real experts. But what I know that throughout these enlargement processes, there were a continuous adaptation of certain rules and benchmarks. Certainly 1993 Maastricht criteria was important, but equally important later on 1995 Madrid criteria, in order to see the aspirant countries to have the governmental and legal structures to implement all the adapted acquis to their internal legal system, was possible or not. It was a scrutinization of those rules. Then we know the 2000 Lisbon Agenda later on brought about an understanding for the European Union for any accession country not to join the European Union unless they resolve their territorial issues, border problems. And with Turkey and Croatia's accession process, we have also come across with a new type of accession regulation to have opening and closing of chapters with benchmarks. Now, insofar as NATO is concerned, we have to take into consideration the specific added value of NATO being the cornerstone of European defense. And for hard security, NATO provides what is needed. Jamie rightly mentioned the recent accession of both Finland and Sweden. I was in both countries in 2017, and when I was interacting with government officials and NGO representatives, they were adamantly against any accession to NATO. And at that time, in Finland, for instance, it was 28.5% thinking that NATO accession would be good for their country's security. But what happened in 2022, and it is thanks to Putin, that those countries' public opinions dramatically changed their stand, and the support reached up to over 90%, which enabled the public support to push the government to reach their goal of joining NATO. Now, if I can compare two organizations, the NATO and the European Union. For NATO, consensus building is in the DNA of NATO. So much so that if strategically it is thought that the goal should be achieved, then all necessary consultation mechanisms are utilized among allies in order to eliminate any obstacle or thought that could prevent reaching this goal, as has been the case for the accession of Finland and Sweden. And let us face it, we may disagree with the style that the Turkish government has shown discontent. The style can be argued, but in essence, Turkey was right to make a point that terrorism, an existential threat to its security, should be taken seriously by two accession countries who wish to join NATO. Therefore, Turkey was right in raising its legitimate security concern. But when it comes to the European Union, although I'm not an expert, what I notice is that the sense of solidarity among member states sometimes overshadow the importance of the strategic importance of any goal to be reached. National policies and priorities become the underlying element of any discussion. Take, for instance, the 2023 November joint declaration from the Commission to the Council about the normalization of relations with the European Union with a positive agenda. Well, when I read it, being non-expert, and which is good, it is a layman's opinion, it boils down to those national priorities raised by two member states, and I'm sure there are several others hiding behind them, to bring conditionality to anything positive that could happen in Turkey's engagement with the European Union, be it modernization of the customs union, which is a long due necessity, or visa liberalization, and any kind of proper engagement rather than transactional engagement that we are having right now. And perhaps for both sides, for the Turkish side and for the European Union, it's a convenient arrangement. Let us assume another government pushing hard on democratic agenda, knocking at the door of the European Union, and they would have to create an excuse, a pretext, where right now they have their own pretext for such an enlargement not to happen. Now, I have a couple of points. First, so hard security I mentioned. EU has two clauses in its treaty, 42.7, which is mutual defense clause, and 222, Article 222 for solidarity clause. But even when we look at the Finnish and Swedish accession to NATO, they were members of the European Union, still they are. They didn't see it as sufficient guarantee for their security that they joined NATO in order to have the safeguard of NATO as such. Now, as to the security implications, right now we come to such a crossing point that each time there is a discussion, NATO debate, whether Ukraine would become a member or not. It is a hot issue in any conversation. I was in Warsaw last week, and the entire debate was on Ukraine, and this was one of the aspects of the discussion. And certainly, when we go back to February 2022, when Russia initiated the special military operations, which we qualified it to be a war, even before that, in December, Russia tabled two treaty drafts, one to NATO, the other one to the United States, incorporating provisions regarding the future of the European security architecture. Of course, at this moment, many of us, quite rightly, say it is not the right moment to talk about what will happen to European security architecture of the future when war is still ongoing. Nevertheless, I take Professor Kibaroğlu's intervention during the last session very important. Arms control, disarmament, and confidence-building measures, transparency measures are unfortunately treated as a secondary domain. But all basic principles enshrined in OSCE documents, they were violated, and we don't need to revisit these principles. But unfortunately, all instruments, be they legally binding or politically binding, like CFE, Open Skies Treaty, or Vienna document of the OSCE, they are dysfunctional. They are no longer serving their purpose. They are suspended, not implemented. And I think we, of course, cannot go back to business as usual with Russia until such time that it shows that its pattern of behavior is changing. Its reading of history is changing. The interpretation of international scene is changing. But at the same time, the West should not make the grave mistake to write off Russia from the outset and not include it in any future architecture because geography and history dictate us to make sure that we create circumstances for them to come back to such an environment. Now, of course, since we cannot go business as usual with Russia, at least we should start a very serious reflection process. 2025, next year, will be the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act. All these fundamental principles that governed European security are there. And I think it would be a unique opportunity for international community and Europeans to put their brains on how to redesign European security architecture with functioning legally and politically binding instruments. Of course, the new treaties to succeed CFE should not be only focusing on category of weapons that it dealt with in the past, and you rightly mentioned the emerging and disruptive technologies, innovation, which definitely go beyond these numerical limits. So not only quantitative, but qualitative limitations would be needed. And not to mention, but very important, INF Treaty that requires the United States and Russia, but also the involvement of allies. One last thing, since you put us a couple of questions. First, the possibility of Trump being re-elected in the United States. It is in every discussion some sort of an elephant in the room. People are contemplating the adverse consequences of such a possibility. What I can say is that in real terms, perhaps things may not change because we have the experience of his first term. And during that time, contrary to his statements, the US commitment and financial and material support to European defense increased. Second, there is a new congressional bill that prohibits any president to unilaterally withdraw from NATO. So it's a good guarantee, and bipartisan support to NATO is unshakable. But I also want to touch the very negative impact of it. If Trump repeats statements like, if you don't pay your due, then of course I will not defend you, and even tell Russia to attack you. Such statements and distancing itself from Article 5 commitment inevitably puts a question mark on NATO's unity, cohesion, solidarity, and the will to defend each other. Article 5 commitment, one for all for one. And you know better than I do, having served as the spokesperson of NATO, NATO's declaratory policy is as important as what you have as capabilities. And one last word, NATO-EU cooperation, and since enlargement is very much interrelated with this intricate question, on that, it is so unfortunate that the acquis which was transferred from Western European Union to European Union and time and again reaffirmed by different EU declarations to fully involve non-EU allies in European projects, unfortunately, is an undelivered commitment. And we are talking about Turkey's possible involvement of to projects like PESCO, European Defense Fund, and we are, after all, talking about capability creation, because strategic autonomy should not mean the European Union to create its own army. It was a thought of the past, but now they have a more realistic approach. But at least responsibility, strategic responsibility, especially in capability creation. And there comes what Jens Stoltenberg, our former boss, said at the GMF meeting, saying that 80% of the capabilities are coming from non-EU allies, and talking about the strategic importance of countries like Norway, Turkey, the United Kingdom, and Canada. Therefore, our EU colleagues should also be open-minded and try to overcome the sense of solidarity in reaching a strategic goal, because I can tell my very personal opinion. EU has a claim to play a geopolitical role. I have my doubts. This is the least I could say. Perhaps better I don't talk more.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this bold statement. Now the ball is in your court, man.
Well, it's not an easy one. First of all, even if time is a scarce commodity, and I will check not to be too long because you start speaking, and although I had my moments, I took my moments. I asked questions from the floor. But I feel really honored. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Coming to Turkey is always a great moment for all of us that think that Turkey and the European Union, it is in the interest of the European Union. But I will come back later to that. I'm going to address first the elephant in the room, because I think we all are on this issue. What will happen if Trump is elected? I fully agree with you. I think that and this is, I'm at least paraphrasing McMaster, don't look at what he says, look at what he does. But the glass half empty is that in those days he had the adults in the room. I mean, I know that he doesn't like, McMaster doesn't like this expression. He says, I mean, each president has to have a team of people that would develop his ideas, but at the same time, we know that many of the things that the president could decide were not implemented, and that he passed to a different thing. So it will depend on who is with him there. What we have heard is not very reassuring. Although he has said that he will not go for this program of Agenda 2025, which is good news, I mean, at least I show my colors. But let's see who is there. Because what you are right, and I fully agree with you, in our days, perception is more important than reality. And the problem is that these declarations by Trump, frankly, during the first term, undermine one of the cornerstones of the multilateral system, of the system that we have, which is the presidency of the United States of America. The presidency of the United States of America was hated, but was respected. With his declarations, many times it was the object of jokes, at least in Spain. People would joke in the bars about the last thing. And this is not good because, I mean, in diplomacy, and you have explained, I mean, consensus in NATO. This is about long-term relationship. It's not transactional. If you envisage relations as transactional, you give me, I give you, and we forget about it and we move, and that's it. You don't have institutions, you don't have anything, you don't have the relations as we understand them. And unfortunately, this is, unless he's corrected, and as I'm an optimist, we need to think that a Trump that, honestly, I think that he will not try to be a candidate for a third time or whatever other possibilities. So he may want to get into history, and he may be surrounded by very serious and reasonable people. And then you have said something which is extremely important, is the Senate will be a Republican Senate, the Congress probably, I mean, these are guesses, but and the Congress a Democratic one. So there will be, we have seen during the worst moments how in the United States you have balances. You have, it's not just about the White House, even if for us outside the United States, it's about the White House, it's much more than that. So I think you are right, you highlighted that he cannot leave, although he can do something a la de Gaulle. Why not? I mean, and this would be an issue, just withdrawing from the military command. Let's see. I think that if we have to cross this bridge, we will, and we will see how NATO overcomes that. I'm very confident in NATO, and after you have spoken, I have very little to add. You have explained extremely well the paradigm of NATO. I'm going to try to bring a few ideas on the paradigm of the European Union and how the two organizations are meant to complement each other, never to compete. And this is one of the things that from time to time the European Union forgets. Why? Well, we have to go to the origins. But if am able to express, because speaking after you two is not an easy task, I would like to present this paradigm of the European Union vis-à-vis what you have said about NATO, how we complement each other, and how in looking into the future, we cannot play tricks. I mean, frankly, the European Union is herbivore. I think that depending on how you see power, we can be a geopolitical power. We may be a geopolitical power, but never a hard power geopolitical power, not in the foreseeable future. Which means that, and this is, I will just address the other elephant in the room, Ukraine cannot get into the European Union until Ukraine has absolutely tight security guarantees. These security guarantees are directly being a member of NATO. Well, you know, we have a Korea model there, which is interesting, and although Korea is now understanding that it's time to move on and to assure its self-defense without counting on the United States. And frankly, this is our background, because I will go back to the origins. The European Union is the most achieved example of the multilateralism that was the vision of Joseph Churchill and Roosevelt in the Atlantic Charter Declaration. And I think it is important, because we are in dark times now, but it is important to remember that August 41, when this Atlantic Charter is published, this Atlantic Charter that sets the paradigm that has underpinned multilateralism, United Nations, the Bretton Woods institution, but especially the European Union, which is peace is the objective. You reach peace through prosperity, and prosperity through exchange, through relations. And this is what the European Union is about. And I think, I mean, when I teach, I make my students read the Atlantic Charter, because this is one of these inspiring texts that very short, but where the vision is there. And in 41, Hitler was in Europe, all over Europe, and you had Churchill and Roosevelt. Roosevelt was not, I mean, the United States, it's before Pearl Harbor, it's August. And so the United States was still trying to find its way with again, something to remember, a public opinion in the United States that was absolutely isolationist, that did not want to get into the messes of the Europeans. And yet you have this fantastic declaration where you have this idea that victors and vanquished have to share resources, that there has to be a world free from want and fear. This is what has inspired. So again, I open here parenthesis. When we criticize the multilateralism and what has been done, you know what? This has been the best 75 years of humanity, frankly, where more people have gone from, first, this is the origin of decolonization, because in the Atlantic Charter there is, and this was difficult for Churchill to accept, there is the self-determination principle. But I have to get to the European Union. So, if you read Monet and you read Schuman and you see how this was done, in the end, the coal and steel community is what about? Peace through putting in common, through establishing relations and creating prosperity. And this is why when people say that, I don't know, one of these great men, had he known that, he would have started biculture. Not at all. It was the market. This was very political, but it was the market. And we have this foundation of the project, and this is what underpins everything. I open a parenthesis here. You say about consensus. The difference between NATO and the European Union is that we have relinquished. In the European Union, this is the issue with Great Britain, we relinquish a lot of sovereignty. And right now, specifically, and at the moments when this consensus has not worked, is because there is a debate on, are we going to put together more in the common, or do we think that by a strange, this is a twist, this is a bias, to get more of our sovereignty, and we don't want. In NATO, the NATO is a different story. So there is not this fearful approach. So here we have this project. Let's not forget that in '54, we have this European Defense Union that just didn't work. And it didn't work because NATO was there. And because in the background, what makes Europe is la question allemande. When you read the memoirs of Monet or whoever, you see them in Algiers with just a big map of Europe, and then pacing back and forth and saying how to solve the German question. And the German question, and this is even called, German question is solved by anchoring Germany into the European, into this burgeoning community and last in the European Union. Allow me to go a bit through the enlargements, because the big market doesn't mean that it was not political. People think that because it's economy. No, my dear friend. I mean, there is nothing more political than this Atlantic Charter, and this Atlantic Charter is about, as I say, peace through prosperity, and prosperity through trade, through exchanges. This is what is about. But Greece is an enlargement that is a strategic enlargement wanted by France. Great Britain, it's a specific, but I think it has to do with Ireland. I mean, maybe you can tell us. But I'm going to say a few words about Spain, because when speaking with Turkish friends, when I was in government and you were very close to opening the negotiations, this is 2002, 2003, 2004, I said, your reference is not the fifth enlargement. The fifth enlargement, we'll come to it, it's an enlargement that Germany wanted. Your reference is Spain and Portugal, but Spain. I mean, we knock at the door of the European, of the communities, of the European communities in the 70s. You did on 63. We had the first bilateral. They told us, oh no, you are not Democrats. Nah, well, when I agree, yeah, but nah, that's it. And we went back when we were Democrats, and they opened the door, but let the chain, and they were bad-humored. I mean, what are you doing? And you have declaration. I'm not saying anything that is not declarations by Mitterrand saying, well, we don't want Spain in our community. And you know, I grew up listening that Europe finished at the Pyrenees. And I mean, and you know that as well. I think that, I mean, probably you are the only one that has a bad, no recollection of this. I mean, to the extent that the first speech of King Juan Carlos as king in 75, the first speech as king, he says, Europe must make room for Spain. And Spaniards are Europeans. And I'm quoting, I'm really quoting. So we were not wanted there. Once we just again, no, hey, here we are Democrats, we have everything. What about now? And honestly, they made us just go up a very long staircase full of just things that went down, and this when there was a lift there, but they didn't show us to the lift. And we had to accept, I mean, this is me. I have had dinner with Michel Rocard, that was first agriculture minister, and then prime minister. And after a good bottle, this was Le Crocodile, you know it very well. This is a fantastic place. When you have to have a good dialogue, you have to go to a nice restaurant, and if possible, have a good bottle of wine. And then, you know, at a certain moment, he says, well, you know, I never understood how you would just eat up your pride and go on and go and be. And once we went in, once we managed with transition periods that nobody has had the transition period, but we managed, we climbed the staircase, we did, but again, this is the reference, and we were not almost 90 million that you are, or 90 million that you are, and frankly, we were not Muslims. And the treaty did not have this double majority that it has now. So, again, I think that your reference is the Spanish accession and the difficulties, and when and this was the first Erdogan government. We organized meetings with the two negotiating, the white hairs that had negotiated Spanish accession in 85, 84, and your teams that were then negotiating. And it was fascinating. Oh, they have told you this. Oh, this, but you know what is behind this and that. This is something that it is important. I mean, there are many of us in the European Union that are perfectly aware that the European Union has negotiated in bad faith with Turkey for a long time. Not any longer. I mean, now, I think that now, because the world has changed, because the role of Turkey has changed, because the European Union has changed, now I think that I wouldn't be so stark, but at certain moments this was. And last but not least, Turkey is an interest of the European Union. Of course, I think that Turkey has now a role of hinge, and it was said in the previous panel that there are 4 quadrants. This, we have to understand that we are not any longer in the world of yesterday, but the only thing I can say is that sometimes, and I'm very, very candid on this, sometimes I see the reactions by Turkish teams, and I think, you know what, this is about resilience. This is about resilience and about, you know, if it's not convenient, you don't even hear it. You go your way. I close with this and move on. Of course, the Sweden, this is an accession, this was a luxury. This is not an issue, it was a luxury. What changes the character of the Union is the 5th enlargement. The enlargement to the former Soviet Union, the Baltics, and to the former Warsaw Pact. This changes because this was rushed, and the same way that in Spain we didn't have to change a single trade law, register law, administrative law. That we had all this. We had to have, of course, the Constitution, of course, democracy, this, we understand these are the conditions, and of course, certain political rights, but the rights of the administrator were there, were in the legal order. Jacobs, the British Advocate General, during another dinner, interesting dinner, was telling me, you know, we were surprised that even your labor laws were laws from the 70s, so from Franco's era. And it's because in the Spanish transition, we had a technocratic successive governments that just prepared this in a very intelligent way. And I don't want to go more into the comparison with Turkey, because I think that there are a lot of comparisons there, and a lot of also attitudes of, you know what, I open just the door like this, I leave the chain, and I'm really bad humor, and I say, no, you wait, you wait. So after this enlargement, this enlargement has changed very fundamental, and this is the perception of enlargement in the European Union, among the citizens. Because what we have seen is that the new member states are creating complicated situations vis-à-vis the rest of the citizens. So there is a fatigue. It's not a fatigue. It's that the European Union citizens, and now I think for different reasons this is very generalized, don't want another enlargement. They don't feel. Yet there is an enlargement. By the way, the only candidate country that you see the list, and even the new members, it was mentioned, Moldova and Georgia, the only one that is not in this list is Turkey, because nobody has said that Turkey is not any longer a candidate, but it has kind of disappeared from this list. There is an issue there. What I think is that could be a very bad result for the Union is that this is a top-down enlargement. Another enlargement that is rushed, as the fifth enlargement was, because the fifth enlargement is the contrary. Allow me to conclude. I mean, the European Union is going through a period of soul-searching, just with this ambivalence that all this system of complementarity was based on another key issue, is the security umbrella of the United States through NATO, but the security umbrella of the United States. Now all this is in flux. We need to reassess what the European Union is going to be. This doesn't mean that we don't have to spend more, to be more on defense. I think that this is a must. I mean, my country, Spain, is the laggard. We are only after Luxembourg. But what I think is that we have, where are the strong characteristic of each one of the two organizations, and find this complementarity. And I said at the beginning, the European Union is still today, and I don't think it will change. It's not that it won't be geopolitical, because geopolitics is about many things, but it's a herbivore. We need NATO. We need NATO. We need this collective organization. I would have loved maybe later. You have mentioned two articles, one of the Treaty of the European Union, one of the Treaty of the Functioning, and when you read them carefully, you see to what extent this is true. So, again, the challenge is Ukraine. Ukraine cannot get into the European Union until the security is not assured. And by the way, this was the way it was done with the fifth enlargement. No former Soviet Union or former Warsaw Pact got into the European Union, and they got to the European Union after they had joined NATO, after the security was assured.
Thank you. So we have covered actually everything. We have covered NATO, new enlargement conditionality, if I may say so, and very precious advice from Minister Palacio about resilience. Well, I still am not so sure.
May I say something?
Of course, please do. I had something in mind, but perhaps it's the same.
Well, just to say that I'm thankful to Minister Palacio to talk about resilience, which is a key word nowadays.
Exactly.
And I think if there is one aspiring country trying to join the European Union. In the past, it is Turkey which has shown its resilience in many ways. So I don't think it is a matter of resilience, because the most important thing is political will. And right now, there is no political will to engage with Turkey, not only in accession talks, which is stalled, but even contradicting their statements, stating that Turkey is in a critical geography with certain importance, population of 85 million. Not to engage with Turkey shows the lack of strategic vision on the part of the European Union. I give you one example. In the Black Sea, there is an electrical cable going through Turkey's exclusive economic zone. Very important. Has there been any consultation with Turkey? No. With Georgia, Azerbaijan, Bulgaria, Romania, they have dealt with the project, and not a single contact has been conducted with Turkey. I mean, there are many examples that I can cite, but I don't think that there is any interest, contrary to the claim that the EU is a geopolitical player, to engage with Turkey, no matter whether we are a candidate country or not. We are there in this geography, and EU, if they are geopolitically important, has to engage with Turkey in a smart way, because we were talking about using enlargement in a strategic and smart way. It was Jamie Shea's wise words. And do we see that in Western Balkans, for instance? In every EU gathering, I hear statements saying, well, we should be careful about what China is doing, Russia is doing, and even including Turkey in the list. Turkey is doing in Western Balkans. And is the European Union using enlargement and other tools properly to engage with these countries and encourage them in whatever path that they should proceed?
Well, then, I'm afraid the turning point, perhaps, in terms of Turkey's accession was 2009, President Sarkozy's first mention of Turkey's civilizational identity, and that it was not and never would be part of Europe. That was the turning point, because the Copenhagen criteria, with resilience and effort, you can fulfill. Democracy, rule of law, whatever, you can achieve all this with resilience and effort, but your identity, you cannot change it. If this is the argument Europe has based its design, then it's a lost battle. I'm afraid to finish to finish our discussion on a pessimistic note, but we have lots of experts on NATO as well as on the European Union, so the floor is open for your remarks and questions. Yes, sir. Yes, mic can be a bit faster.
Madam Chairperson, I should first of all commend the panelists. All of them were excellent. Thank you for your presentations. I should also congratulate the organizers for having ensured the gender balance at this panel. Actually, I have one comment and one question. The comment is about the importance, the significance of consensus, the decision-making process at NATO. It cannot be really overemphasized, because as Tacan İldem said, it's within the DNA of NATO, within the DNA of NATO members. It's never been transactional, as it happens to be sometimes at the European Union. And the member countries have most of the times acted very responsibly for the common good of the membership and for the common good actually of the Euro-Atlantic area. We had problems in the past, in 2003, when I was permanent representative at NATO during the Iraqi, just before the Iraqi operation by the US and UK. I think Ana Palacio was the foreign minister at that time. We had lengthy consultations at the council, but in the end, we were able to achieve consensus. And in that connection also, I want to to bring some clarification to some misperceptions, especially in my country, about NATO. There are many people who think that NATO is a separate entity which takes decisions on its own, and the governments, the member countries, to implement them, which is totally wrong. There is also a perception that NATO is a military organization, which is also wrong, actually. The decisions are made by the civilians, by the diplomats, under the, of course, the instructions of their governments, and the military do implement those decisions. My question is about the future role of NATO. There are some questions about whether NATO is aspiring to become a global organization, especially looking at their new partnerships. Actually, some of them are old, but with Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, as well as actually there's a recent report about its possible cooperation with the countries in south of Euro-Atlantic area, Middle East, and so on, Maghreb. So my question is both to Tacan, İldem, and Jamie Shea. What would they say about this, future role of NATO? Thank you.
Well, if I may start, I was a member of the NATO 2030 reflection group, independent experts group, and during our first meeting with the Secretary General, he talked about the importance of keeping NATO militarily strong, because adaptation since 2014 was underway. Second, to make NATO politically stronger, and you are absolutely right, it is a politico-military organization, not a military alliance as such. And the third direction we got from him was that NATO should adopt a global approach. Now, many speculated after having heard the statement of the Secretary General whether NATO would be assuming the role of a global police, which was not the intention of the Secretary General. What he meant was that more and more we are confronting ourselves with challenges and threats emanating from different parts of the world which do not recognize boundaries or geographical locations, like cyber attacks, hybrid threats, and it requires NATO to have a global approach, expanding its outreach, engaging with different partners, and right now, since China, with its stated policies and coercive actions, poses a serious challenge for NATO allies, we need to engage with Indo-Pacific, Asia-Pacific partners. And Jamie rightly mentioned how important it is to engage with New Zealand, Australia, Korea, and Japan, to have a situational awareness as to what's happening in the region, but at the same time to have a strategic anticipation for the future. Now, the partnerships that you referred to, NATO's southern neighborhoods, because it is not only Mediterranean Dialogue and Istanbul Cooperation Initiative groupings, but also we need to keep an eye on the Sahel region because threats and challenges emanating from Sahel region cannot be treated only in that region. It has an impact, they have an impact on MENA region, and it would be important for NATO to adapt itself to better engage with the southern neighborhoods using the existing partnership models, but revitalizing them. And in the past, the driver was demand. It was a demand-driven exercise, engagement. Whatever they were asking us, we were trying to help them in terms of capacity building, building integrity programs, all of that, counter-terrorism capacity. But it should be more interest-driven. Wherever our interests overlap with each other, we can expand our cooperation with those partner nations. But in any case, I have to emphasize the fact that NATO will remain to be a regional organization without any global claim, but will more and more adopt a global approach in dealing with challenges and threats emanating from different directions. And we always uphold the principle of 360-degree approach to be fit to defend from wherever, which direction the threat could come. And that's why increasing our capacity in dealing with cyber and hybrid attacks and also using technology is going to be more crucial. And that's why in the recent years, innovation is in the heart of the work of NATO. And more we invest a lot on that as individual allies, but also as an alliance, coordinating efforts and engaging with private sector, technology companies, academia, because talking about resilience, it should not be an whole of government approach, but whole of society approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Tacan has said a lot already, but of course I'm not going to sort of turn down this opportunity to say something. So I tried to say the same things as him, but in my own way, and make it sound different, at least I hope, slightly. Look, I think the first thing, of course, is that if you're in an alliance like NATO, you've got two basic functions. Number one is day-to-day immediate protection against the most urgent scenarios, Article 5, collective defence, Eastern Europe. But of course, you've always had this sort of sense that if you can create a more cooperative, peaceful world, if you can build a hinterland of security as broadly as possible around your territory and have as many sort of good defence and security partnerships as you can with like-minded countries, all working together, then it's going to eventually make your defensive task that much cheaper, easier, safer, and more successful. So there's a logic here. In other words, it's what my wife tells me, Jamie, there's your circle of responsibility, but there's also the circle of interest, the sort of things that you have to be tracking and keeping an eye on. But at the same time, in so many areas, as I said, the preoccupations of the Asian countries have become the same as ours. And the degree of sort of interactivity is increasing all the time. I mentioned the North Koreans in Ukraine at the present time. The president of North Korea has sent in a couple of truckloads of about 11,000 containers in a couple of months to Russia more ammunition than we, in the totality of the West, have been able to deliver to Ukraine since 2022. In just 11,000 truckloads. So what we do is increasingly having an impact on the Asians and vice versa. Just let me give you one example. President Putin, in order to get the ammunition and the missiles from North Korea, has given North Korea satellite launch technology, access to Russian ballistic missile technology, and targeting. That is now a massive headache for our Asian partners, who are obviously, South Korea, Japan, going to be on the receiving end of a more nuclear capable, more effective North Korea. Or on the other hand, Poland has gone to South Korea for much of its military procurement, buying South Korean tanks, not American tanks, and buying South Korean aircraft and fighters as well. My country, the UK, we're building our new sixth generation fighter aircraft with Japan and Italy. And hopefully Turkey will be involved in that with your extremely good defence industry, which is all the more reason why the EU should be engaging you on any kind of defence production strategy. Turkey has so much to offer. Last week, the French Foreign Legion carried out an exercise in Japan. Germany, NATO countries, my own country with our aircraft carrier, are regularly sending ships to that area as well. And when we come to the United Nations and condemning Russia for Ukraine, having the diplomatic support of the Japanese and the New Zealanders and the Australians and so on, gives us a much more powerful, legitimate case to make on the world stage. So to some degree, you know, to the extent that our nations individually are putting Asia-Pacific much higher up in their national security strategies, if that's the way our nations are going, and not just the United States, in seeking those partnerships, NATO will have to go the same way too. I mean, much of our future sort of technology on nuclear propulsion is going to come from the AUKUS deal, which the UK and the United States has signed with Australia, and now more countries want to join that as well. But there's a more fundamental reason. I used to write, in my academic days, books on what saved the West is that we know how to do alliances, and our adversaries, think of the World War II, don't do alliances. They're not good. They may be on the same ideological wavelength. Think of Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany, and the Japanese imperialists in World War II, but they're hopeless at really coordinating strategy and helping each other. They don't fight the same war. We do, and we win. But at the moment, what we see is this growing nexus of China and Russia coming closer together. So NATO can't think about Russia today. It can't without thinking of China. Who's enabling Russia to carry on this war in Ukraine financially, in terms of technology, in terms of microprocessors, components, and all the like, you know, giving Russia cheap access to loans and the rest. Iran, North Korea. And so NATO now, looking out on the world, says 95% of the territory of our adversaries is not in Europe, it's in Asia. We are basically up against a coalition which is Asia-based, not Europe-based. As increasing, cooperating and working together, we don't know if it's going to become a kind of, you know, adversary NATO yet. And I don't believe, and I agree with Tacan, that there's not going to be an Indo-Pacific NATO anytime soon. But so, ironically, that circle of sort of responsibility, a circle of interest, which used to be quite distinct, you know, we'll do collective defense, but we'll go to Asia for, you know, intelligence and advice and help and, you know, compare notes and so on. Those two circles are actually merging, and it is becoming a single strategic theatre, even if the way in which we organise ourselves within that theatre is going to become, is obviously not going to be the same kind of thing. You know, if the other guys get to do alliances the way that NATO could do alliances, then we are in a lot of trouble.
And if I may just say one sentence and wait until we have the Arctic, the passage in the Arctic, then what will mean having a theater of operations or a different theater of operations, where you stop. One consequence for the European Union is that this paradigm is gone, this paradigm of peace through prosperity and prosperity through trade. And this eruption of geopolitics into the geoeconomy has consequences that the European Union has to address as well.
Yes, sir.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Mehmet Gün, I am a lawyer. I would like to ask Mr. Jamie, and following Anna's question, maybe Tacan Bey could also contribute. When Trump says to Europe that you've got to pay for your own security, it draws the attention to economics. The economics requires the unity of economic unity of the NATO members, and that calls Turkey's unification membership to European Union. Also, that requires solving problems in the Aegean, maybe with the Greeks, and also developing a common vision for the Mediterranean. And the Roman Empire built an Hadrian Wall in the UK. I guess it's one of the major problems for the European economies is the migration from the North African countries. So would it not be the requirement of the NATO and the European Union to actually try and solve all those problems very quickly, create an economical unity in this part of the world so that they can become a major international power center? Thank you very much.
God, that's a 64 million lira question. Because how could you begin to answer a question like that? Yes, I mean, obviously, economic strength is always the key to military strength. That we know, particularly when you have conflicts sort of changing to become much more knowledge-based, less platform-based, much more involved with civil society and linking into the innovation of industry. Think of all of those Ukrainians in their garages who are building the drones that are then supplied to the army. Think of all of the Ukrainians going online to find drones abroad, even buying them in the Baltic states and elsewhere because of crowd financing. I mentioned Elon Musk and the private sector. And there, naturally, in terms of technology, in terms of innovation, democracy, civil society, we have an advantage over our adversaries. But of course, they're catching up very, very quickly, particularly the Chinese and so on. And it's true, if we don't sort of solve our weaknesses in terms of academic research, in terms of education standards in our societies, for instance, then we are going to fall behind progressively these other countries who will produce the kind of data machines that will be key in the future. So we can't rest on our laurels. You look at the United States, where 30 years ago, 80% of all of the PhDs in the United States were won by American citizens. Today, that's 27%. And the rest are all foreign students who come from abroad and then take their knowledge back with them. So I think, yes, there's a sort of a wake-up call in that respect in terms of our economic development. Obviously, in Europe, there is a problem that we're very good at regulating the rest of the world, but we're not very good at inventing and innovating. We don't have a venture capital market. European venture firms go off to the United States. I saw the other day in Brussels that it takes a company in the EU 6 months to a year to get a patent to trade. In the United States, particularly if you have an interesting technology, 6 hours, not 6 months. We need to see about that. What is the basis that's going to hold the EU back and how we overcome those things? A sensible approach to migration, which is something that we don't seem to be able to have in the European Union, is part of it as well. So you're right, I agree with you. I think NATO, without becoming an economic organisation, has to take a lot more interest in these kind of issues. One thing, however, I would flag up is that we do see the military increasingly involved in civil defence tasks. In my country, the UK, we've been, for example, doing firefighting machines during the firefighters' strike, delivering fuel supplies from refineries during the fuel refinery strike, building Nightingale hospitals for COVID patients, distributing COVID vaccines, fighting forest fires, picking up migrants in the English Channel, but if that saves their lives, I'm all in favour of that. So we've been using about 60% of our military for defence against Russia, and 40%, the rest of our military, for homeland defence tasks. Do we actually need soldiers to do those kind of things? I think one thing that the EU could really look at, particularly if you look at Ukraine, dealing with refugees, providing food, providing water, providing shelter, humanitarian aid delivery, all of those things. I think we could look to the EU maybe to think of providing some kind of civil protection force, you know, of people, ex-policemen, ex-soldiers, I don't know, you know, volunteers, but people who've got these resilience skills who could basically do these kind of things, which are not necessarily things that only the military can do, provided they have the budget, the organisation, the leadership, and the scarce soldiers that we have today would be freed up to be much more involved in what soldiers could do, which would be obviously the more classical military defence issues.
Well, just add two things. First, it's absolutely clear that it doesn't make sense to use the military to do tasks that you don't need the skills of the military, and it doesn't really make sense. We are doing that. Why? Because frankly, until now, we were on this idea of the peace dividend that, except for maybe the UK in the European Union, when you were in the European Union, and France to a certain extent, the rest, starting with Germany and Spain, that has a long tradition of having a very strong, the culture of the people was not there. So it was this idea of the peace dividend. I mean, our military were in Afghanistan to build roads and to repair, and the military is not for that. And I think that this has to be stressed, and maybe this wake-up call of Russia will make us react. Now, I will just add on what you have said. Papandreou has responded to you. We are in an internal problem. Our societies are polarized. You were saying we need to have a reasonable policy on immigration, but the truth of the matter is that there is no dialogue, because there's politics as just weaponizing politics in the sense that you throw at the adversary in politics any topic and you distort and you look for revenge and this polarization situation. So it's extremely interesting. Now, one footnote. The European Union has disbursed the disbursement of the European Union amount to more, and the European Union is doing great at supporting this effort. Honestly, to the Baltics distress, Ukraine was connected to the European Union grid in 3 months, and they had in their access treaty that they would be linked before 26. So it was first Ukraine, then them. And frankly, the way that Poland and even Spain, are reacting to these refugees is creating internal tensions, because we react to these refugees in a different way than we react to illegal immigration from other issues. Because for us, what we have seen is women and children. What we have seen in 2015, for instance, in Germany, were young males coming, very young males, and no women, no children, no old people, which is what we are seeing now. You are right. This is about what we have to discuss. And as I'm an optimist, I think that this wake-up call is setting in motion certain mechanisms that hopefully it will be messy, it will be long, but when we are against the wall, we tend to react well.
So I think we are coming to your remark and one more question, and we are wrapping up. Okay, Ambassador.
Mr. Gün's question is very much related to Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, which in fact even thought of in 1949. It is resilience. Now we are talking it more often. Because it is a national responsibility of each individual ally to develop their capacities, and it requires investment on human capital and to expand our capabilities. There is now an elevated sensitivity amongst the allied countries. They keep Article 3 of the treaty as strong as Article 5 of the treaty, which is the collective defense clause. And I think if you are not with the necessary capacity and capabilities, then Article 5 will not have the necessary means for you to deliver. So that's why I take your question very important for all of us to reflect on.
Thank you. Is there? Okay, then two ambassadors to wrap up. If you go ahead, if you had
Well, thank you so
already
much.
the
It was
mic.
quite exciting,
please,
a bit technically high level, and some parts it was difficult to understand. I have one question, a simple one. Now, of course, all the members of the NATO are equal, no question about it. But some members are more equal. There is no question about it. Now, at this right moment, we have United States at war with Russia over Ukraine. We can say that. And now, just yesterday, the President of the United States have decided that they should be allocating some terminal high-level defense systems to the Ukraine. So it is quite different. And of course, at the same time, the other equal members of the NATO, European countries, they're also assisting Ukraine to a maybe less degree, sometimes not so much vehemently, so enthusiastically as the United States, but still it goes on like this. So what happens at the end? So and then the major member of a country becomes quite, I would say, engaged with a problem, and this in turn will, of course, return back to the very structure of NATO. And that's the question I have. And since I'm less panel and this is the last speaker, I also, and when we are talking about multilateralism, when we are talking about global future, it is not only arms that we are discussing. There should be trade. There should be IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, how they are ending up in this structure. What do you expect from them at the end? This could also be mentioned. Well, thank you so much. It was quite exciting. One last remark jokingly, it is always dangerous to be in a room full of experts. Thank you.
Yes, I should. Please, the mic. Here. İkinci sıraya lütfen. Evet.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As always, you are conducting with plenty of eloquence this session, and I would like to thank all the speakers for their very valuable interventions. Madam Palacio, Madam Minister has just mentioned that Europe is going through an internal problem, a turbulence, let's say. It is true in a sense. I will not go in depth about that, but Europe has, I think, in my opinion, has been very influential for 400 years, 500 years, with its own vision, with the vision. But now it has trouble in accommodating itself with the transformations we are living all around the world. Therefore, I think a time will come where Europe has to reflect how it will accommodate to this transformation. As regards enlargement, it has always been a geopolitical issue. Geopolitics in enlargement has always had the prominent weight. And when we consider Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, they were never in the enlargement perspective. They were part of the Eastern Partnership or European neighborhood policy, where Europe had its neighbors, kept its neighbors in political and economic stability so that its own stability was guaranteed. And it was carrot and stick process where common projects were built so that these countries could have more democratic transitions, or they could accomplish their economic reforms. But now, as Ambassador İldem has mentioned, good neighborly relations has become one of the criteria for membership. And when we look to Ukraine, 17% of its territory is under occupation. Georgia, Abkhazia, and Ossetia are under Russian influence. Moldova, Transdniester, and Gagauzia. All these problems, of course, we cannot speak at this moment of time of political stability. Secondly, I was a bit shocked to see, to witness the, how would I say, the demonstrations and the obstruction of Ukrainian grain reaching Europe. Poland, all of a sudden, decided not to import. We've seen farmers uprising all over Europe for cheap grain. And when we think of the average hectare of farmers in Europe, which is 16 hectares, while in Ukraine it's 1,000 hectares, how do you think this common agricultural policy could be accommodated? And secondly, do you see in the short run, sincerely, the membership of these countries?
Well, first, Europe 400 years. No, I mean, I think, and this is under the supervision of Dr. Xi, because European times started to decline with World War I and completely collapsed in World War II. What we are seeing today is a transformation of the world from a unipolar moment after the end of the Cold War, and the United States has to understand that I think that they can claim to be the indispensable power, and I'm quoting Madeleine Albright, but with a very different leadership. The leadership today has nothing to do with the leadership during the Cold War or in this unipolar hubris moment. This is, I think, and the panel before, we saw how this awareness of the United States that the multipolarity has to be differently led is fundamental, and how we have to bring in other voices that have to count, have to have a say. And of course, Africa was not present. Latin America was, and Latin America was very active. And I'm sure that you have read that, but Keynes' memoirs of the Bretton Woods are very interesting on how the Latin Americans brought into the Bretton Woods institutions the D of development there. So this is my first comment. On the European Union, frankly, as I said about the fifth enlargement makes that the center of gravity of the Union goes north and east. This is why, again, Spain and Turkey, we are at the two ends of the Mediterranean. We are at the south. We need to anchor this union more into the south, into a different understanding of Russia. The adversarial understanding of Russia has always been the realm of the former Soviet Union and the former Warsaw Pact that would tell us, I mean, don't trust Russia will, and they were right. I remember at the Munich Security Conference in 2007 when Putin announced, and I was a bit impressed, but everybody was saying, hey, come on, he's saying that, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, and except the Baltics, except the Baltics. So, yes, we need to rebalance this, because it has been mentioned the Sahel. The Sahel has completely disappeared. Everything is Ukraine. And in the south, among other issues, we have the illegal immigration that is in part due to this insecurity, this belt of fire that just surrounds us, but also from the south. So fully agree. Now, your very good questions on the cynicism or the hypocrisy in the European Union. This is the rules of the game. If you have an election and you have to get the farmers' votes, then you say Ukraine no, and you take positions because it's very difficult to be heard and to win an election. You say no, but we are committed because this is an agreement of the European Union. It's messy. I mean, honestly, if making sausages is something that you don't have to see, what happens in Brussels, better ignore, frankly. But, and you have to cope and you have to just make contortions knowing that this will tone down as soon as the election, as soon as the hurdle is over. This is another comment. I mean, the European Union is not just Sarkozy. I mean, as I say, Mitterrand said, Spanish, no, we don't want Spain in the Union. I think that the process is going to change, is changing. And there are going to be opportunities to have a stronger relationship. Sorry.
Yes.
If I could be allowed a quick final comment, and I also want to come back answering this question, hopefully, to the other previous two questions. My sense with the EU as a new leadership, of course, Ursula von der Leyen is still there, but many new faces around Brussels as they take over, is they've got about sort of 5 really key challenges to face. Number one is that people aren't obeying the rules any longer internally. And if the EU has to have credibility, it sets rules which its members obey, and it's able to threaten them with sanctions if they don't. But everywhere you look, you know, Germany is now putting back border controls. Hungary has broken Schengen when it comes to visas for Russians and the rest. France has been breaking all of the budget rules for years. I could give numerous examples, but if it basically the message gets out that you don't need to take the rules seriously, always claim an exception, the enterprise is in trouble. The second thing is this obsession with l'Europe qui protège. Now, this is a phrase of Macron. And you can understand after Lehman Brothers, after COVID, people wanted to look for Europe not to provide prosperity, but to protect. Europe has taken on a bigger role in defense, of course, that's part of it. But an Europe qui protège can quickly become protectionism, massive tariffs on American or Chinese electric vehicles, stifling of innovation, we were talking about this earlier, very rigid labor laws, over-regulation of tech companies, all in the name of protection. Some of it, you know, protection of data and the privacy of citizens online, you know, the Digital Services Act is all good stuff. But, you know, you can't make protectionism or an Europe qui protège at the price of your ability to innovate. The third thing is that what has kept Europeans united with the European Union has been high growth. The EU has been able to deliver growth, and coming back to the very good question of the gentleman there, it's growth ultimately which allows you to pay for all of these public goods, including defense, that you need. The problem is the growth has become anemic for years now. Poland is an outlier, which has not done too badly, but the last figure for Germany I saw was 0.01% this year. France is now negative, many other countries are hovering. You know, growth, how to get growth going and therefore create a larger pie is becoming an issue as well. Migration, Europe has rapidly aging populations. And in certain areas, think of the Baltic states, 40% of people have left over the last few years. So it needs migrants, but it's unable to have a rational, we were talking about this dialogue on migrants, in order to renew and energize its population. If you're going to have, you know, 3 people like me retired, supported by 1 European worker in the future, that's a powerful argument for Turkey's membership, by the way. It will fix our
Turkey
migration
too is
problems
aging,
overnight. May I be allowed, Madam, to very quickly last word to mention two other things extremely briefly. And this concerns Turkey as well. One of the problems, I think, when it comes to enlargement is the EU has taken an incredibly brave decision to say, right, the EU is Europe and Europe will be the EU. So all of the democracies of Europe will have place in the EU. But this means two things. Number one, that we have to figure out how we're going to do it and pay for it, agriculture. But number two, how we're going to reform the institutions, majority voting, etc., inside the EU so that we can function with 40 members in the future. But having declared the objective, it hasn't actually yet come to terms with the mechanics. And finally, Gaza. What Gaza shows is that when it comes to the EU's ability to project power abroad, it's brilliant in certain areas, Russia, Ukraine, funding. The EU gave 35 billion euros this week to Ukraine as a soft loan with the collateral, the Russian central bank interest and so on. It's been very firm-footed there. But when it comes to the Middle East, for example, the Czechs block a European resolution because they're very pro-Israeli. Europe is simply, despite the economic aid that it's given in the past to Palestine, is a complete non-player. So it's not able to achieve consistency over its common foreign security policy in order to have influence. Because it does well somewhere, it thinks it's going to carry over to the next crisis elsewhere, but unfortunately it doesn't. So those are the things, at least if I were Ursula von der Leyen, which thank God I'm not, I would be trying to fix in her final 5 years.
Well, thank you. I think we better wrap up. It's
I will
quarter
say
to 7.
Just a few things. Ambassador Sezgin referred to the good neighborly relations clause, a necessity for accession countries to fulfill. Well, in fact, it was violated by the admission of Cyprus in 2004 without resolution of the Cyprus question. So there is a very strong precedent, very unfortunate precedent, which blocks everything thereafter. So we have to remember this historical baggage that the EU started to carry since 2004. Now, coming to Ambassador Aran's question, some are more equal than others. In fact, when we were co-authoring an article with Ambassador Üzümcü, one of the misperceptions, I should say, I'm excluding you from this, of course, is that there are certain nations, powerful nations at NATO, who are instrumental in mobilizing forces and delivering the decisions, and the others follow suit. Yes, it is true they can try to mobilize things, but it doesn't prove to be something reaching its result in practice. I give you one example. In 2008, when I was Perm Rep to NATO, the main question was not only what NATO should do with Georgia and Ukraine, but another important issue was ballistic missile defense. Because at that time, you may recall, United States' preference was to have bilateral agreements with different nations, Poland, Romania, this and that, to make sure that it ensures a system that would serve first and foremost for the United States. Countries like Turkey were adamantly against this because we felt the need to have this system, but we at the same time wanted it to be put under the NATO umbrella and to have NATO governance. And 2008 communique discussions at ambassadorial level, there was a placeholder. When you don't have an agreed language, you just have a placeholder. The content of it will be inserted later on when there is an agreement. So my counterpart, American colleague, Victoria Nuland, came with a text, distributed, and said, this is the content of the placeholder. So some are more equal than others. Well, when I looked at it, it was not addressing any security concern of my country. So I raised my hand. I said, well, Mr. Secretary General, I suggest you keep it as a placeholder because this has never been discussed earlier. No consultations were conducted. So we will discuss it later. Of course, Toria Newland was taken aback and was very nervous. And he said, no, put it as a paragraph. If there is any objection, then they can square bracket it. It was a practice in our NATO negotiations. In any case, she sent me a note, since we were sitting almost next to each other with our British colleague. She said, I negotiated this paragraph with 7 countries. So what are you trying to do? And my response was, this 7, does it include Turkey as well? Interrogation mark. And in the afternoon, she got an appointment from me. Together with 7 ambassadors, we negotiated the paragraph, addressing all concerns of Turkey. And it shows that how one country's preferences may not prevail if there is a resistance. Consultation is key at NATO in order to reach consensus. And when we recall that this initial idea of having bilateral arrangements with different countries, the 2012 Chicago summit proved Turkey's case to be embraced by all because we had the formulation to have NATO ballistic missile defense cover, and inclusive security was one important consideration that we made. One last point, if I may, since we talked about also Gaza, and now in a reflection process that I refer to revisit the foundations of these instruments, arms control, transparency, confidence building measures, without touching the fundamental principles that should govern European security, because they shouldn't be open for renegotiation. But the West, all of us, should also be critical about our performance when it comes to implementation of principles. When we talk about territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of states, when we talk about the international law, including humanitarian law, to be upheld by all, then if we create circumstances that others, we call it global south nowadays, they perceive double standards, unfortunately becoming a practice of the West when it comes to Ukraine, to uphold these principles, when it comes to Gaza, to be silent for certain, perhaps historical baggage that they are carrying, not to be criticized as if they are anti-Semitic, to be silent, I think tarnishes the image of the West and credibility of institutions that West has created. So I think we should be mindful of that in the serious reflection process in the future.
Thank you very much, sir. And I'm particularly sensitive to the issue of Gaza, having worked there. Thanks to the speakers and the audience, and I think this is your turn to close the section.
Sure, I will. Okay. All right, thanks again to all our participants and to our panelists. It was a long but very thought-provoking session, and navigating an uncertain common global future. I have to say, I think we had a lot of conversations and discussions today about the fact that there's only one way out of whatever this is, this uncertain moment, and as we're looking into the future, the lesson that I'm taking with me today is that, and I think the message was delivered very strongly on this stage today, is collaboration is key, and working together is key at a time when everybody is sort of running away, going home, not willing to talk to one another, but that's not how we handle the complexity that lies ahead of us. That was, I believe, the message that was very strongly delivered today on the stage. Global Relations Forum, once again, it's the 15th anniversary event. I'm so glad, once again, thank you for inviting me to join you today. It was wonderful to be here to preside over the meeting, and I wish you many more years of just bringing us together for thoughtful, nuanced debate about where Turkey is headed, where our world is headed. I think this was a wonderful opportunity to have that exchange today with guests from Turkey and abroad. Once again, many thanks. I will now invite Ambassador Selim Yana for his closing remarks, and thank you all.
Thank you. Don't worry, I'm not going to speak long. I just want to invite our chairperson to the stage for a moment. Is Bahar Hanım here? Ashin Hanım, could you come here as well? Please. I'd like to thank you for all the goodwill, efforts, and support that you've done for us. So I want to give you these flowers as a gesture on our part.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, we would not have been able to do this if we didn't have this wonderful setting. So we have to thank the municipality. The mayor has left Turkey yesterday to Mexico. That's why he could not be here with us. But he has sent his representative, and I'd like to thank her very much for giving us this opportunity. And of course, we wouldn't be able to manage all this without our good moderator and actually the master of ceremony. So, Afshin, thank you very much for doing this. I know that you're not 100% well, but you did it for us more than 100%. So thank you very much. Thank you. So the session is closed. Thank you very much for joining us, and we do hope that you'll be here on the 30th event.
Teşekkürler. Sağ olun. Çok naziksiniz. Çok zarifsiniz. Teşekkürler.